It's Friday the 9th of January. From the MEN newsroom, this is Channel M's Lunchtime News, and these are today's headlines. Paying on credit, we reveal how easy it is to get a handful of store cards with little or no checks.
We went into 9 different stores in central Manchester. We were given anything from £125 right up to £1,000 to spend in store.
Also coming up, the police officer being sentenced for performing a sex act in his patrol car in front of a teenage girl. And the creature count. Staff at Chester Zoo work out exactly how many animals are in the park.
Once a year, our records officer will print off sheets of every single animal we have in the collection, and literally our keepers go around with a pen and a paper and we'll write down exactly how many animals we have here.
Good afternoon. Our top story today. A Channel M investigation has revealed how easy it is to get thousands of pounds of credit without any checks. With everything we've heard about the economy in trouble and the high street struggling, you might think shops will be more careful about who they give store cards to. But that's not necessarily the case. Together with the Manchester Evening News, we went to see how much credit someone with no income could get simply by walking into shops and asking for it. Ben Bland has the story.
This is Abigail. She's a student and doesn't have a full-time job. So how easy is it for her to get credit at some of the big-name shops on the high street? Well, first was Debenhams. There she was given a card with a credit limit of £1,000. Then House of Fraser. Again, they approved her for £1,000 of credit. Oasis, the fashion chain, issued Abby with a card and up to £300 of credit. At Monsoon, she could have spent another £300 in store. And it was a similar story at Topshop. £350 of credit, while New Look offered her £125. However, at BHS, they carried out a referral but refused to give credit on the spot, and the same at Marks & Spencer. At River Island, they also refused to give Abby a card. Even so, in the space of an hour, she'd managed to get more than £3,000 of credit.
It was all very quick and easy. We walked into the store, went up to the counter, asked for a store card, filled in a form, sales assistant would make a quick phone call, and within 5 minutes we'd have anything from £300 to £1,000 to spend.
The stores that offered credit defended their position. In a statement, Topshop said to us, every applicant is given a full credit check to prevent people receiving credit if they are not in a position which means they can afford it. This would include students. Store cards can be very tempting, usually offering a big percentage discount on any purchases you make the day you sign up. But they often carry a high interest rate. For example, if you used the card from Oasis, you'd pay interest at a rate of 28.9%, plus a £12 charge for any late payments. And of course, with every card, there are the terms and conditions. So for the unaware, it's potentially a minefield. And with more people in financial difficulty at the moment, perhaps the safest option is if you don't have the money, simply don't spend it. Ben Bland, Channel M News.
Well, let's stay with this story now, and we're joined by Tom Torher from the Citizens Advice Bureau in Salford. Tom, thank you very much for coming in.
Thank you.
Looking at that film there, what's your reaction to how easy we found it is to actually get credit from stores?
Well, I'm not at all surprised, to be honest. It is quite a significant problem that credit is made sometimes available far too easily for people who are perhaps not in a position to be able to deal with the commitments they've undertaken by signing up to a credit agreement. And although credit's a very important thing for people to be able to plan and organise their lives, we at the Citizens Advice Service see many people come in having gained credit without being able to repay it, and also perhaps not fully understanding the obligation or the interest rates or how interest rates work with credit.
Well, with that number of store cards, you could quite easily end up with debts that you simply couldn't repay. What would your advice be to people?
Absolutely. If people are finding it difficult to repay any debt at all, but particularly credit card or store cards, they should seek advice very early, as soon as possible. The sooner they seek advice, the more straightforward and easier it is to resolve the problem. And we can do a great deal for people who have problems with any debt, but particularly this sort of debt. So we would recommend that people seek advice from their local Citizens Advice as soon as possible.
And very briefly, what sort of things could you do to try to help people who are in debt?
Well, what we do is we assess the overall situation that somebody might find themselves in. So we prioritise those debts which are more important, paying for your rent, paying your mortgage, for instance, those sorts of things which are more significant than and other debts. And then we go backwards and we assess how much people can afford to pay, and we negotiate with the creditors. We also make sure that all of the debt is actually enforceable legally to make sure that people do have to actually pay it.
OK, Tom Tohut from the Citizens Advice Bureau, thank you very much for joining us. We'll have more on this later in the programme as well. Let's check some more of the day's top stories now. And JD Sports has reported better than expected profits. The Oldham based store says like-for-like sales were up 2.8% in the 5 weeks to January the 5th. Several other firms have reported falls for the same period. It's all the more impressive because they were one of the few firms not to slash prices before Christmas. Elsewhere on the high street, John Lewis has announced a 27.4% jump in sales last week, with shoppers snapping up reduced bargains. New figures show the North West had more cases of measles than any other region outside of London in the 11 months to the end of November. 152 cases were reported in total. 27 were in November itself, a slight fall on October when there were 35. Police are to investigate Cristiano Ronaldo's crash that wrote off his £200,000 Ferrari. He hit a concrete wall in a road tunnel near Manchester Airport yesterday but was uninjured. They'll want to see if there's any evidence of careless driving. If he's convicted of it, he could get a fine and up to 9 points on his licence. A policeman who carried out a sex act in his patrol car in front of a teenage girl is due to be sentenced. PC Christian Abbott is appearing at Minsell Street, Crown Court. With more details from there, here's Ben Bland.
PC Christian Abbott, who's now 27 years old, has been a police officer with Greater Manchester Police since 2001. In November last year, a jury here at Minsell Street Crown Court found him guilty of engaging in sexual activity in the presence of a child. Now that relates to an incident that happened back in April 2007. At the time, PC Abbott was based at Littleborough Police Station. At 2:30 one morning, he found a 15-year-old girl who'd gone missing from her care home. He took her back to Littleborough Police Station, where he asked her if she would show him her breasts in return for a cigarette. Later, he drove her back to the care home in West Yorkshire, but on the way, he drove down an unmarked road where he asked her if she was a prostitute and if she would have sex with him. She replied, "No, aren't you meant to be a copper?" PC Abbott then performed a sex act on himself in the liveried police car in his uniform in front of that 15-year-old girl. In November, the jury here found him guilty and the judge granted him bail over Christmas and New Year, but warned PC Abbott and his family that because of the nature of the offence, the sentence would inevitably be custodial.
The United Nations is demanding a ceasefire in Gaza. The Security Council has voted for a resolution calling for an end to the fighting there as the conflict moves into a 13th day. That as Israeli troops have been accused of evacuating more than 100 Palestinians to a house in Gaza before shelling it, killing 30 of them. Engineers are looking at a series of faults that have given commuters on the West Coast Main Line 6 days of misery. There have been repeated breakdowns and problems on various points along the route, meaning since Christmas there's not been one day of normal service. Network Rail insists they're all isolated faults and says they don't stem from the £9 billion upgrade of the route, which some say was rushed. Let's look ahead to what will be a busy weekend of sporting action now. With the details on that, here's Sam Goodman.
Thank you, James. Stockport will have a representative this year in this year's BDO Darts World Championships. 9th seed Tony O'Shea set up a semi-final showdown against close friend Darryl Fitton after knocking out favourite Gary Anderson 5-3 last night at the Lakeside. Fitton, meanwhile, came from 4-2 down against Scott Waits to win 5-4 and seal his place in the last four. Well, away from the hockey, Fitton and O'Shea are close friends, and you can see highlights of tomorrow's game and Sunday's final in our news bulletins on Monday. Well, despite the recent cold weather, tonight's Guinness Premiership game at Edgeley Park between Sale Sharks and league leaders London Irish is definitely on. We've been speaking to Chris Jones and coach Kingsley Jones to get their thoughts ahead of a match which they haven't won since 2006.
You know, we deserve to give the crowd a good result against them. The last few years we haven't done as well as we should do against London Irish. They're a good side, they make it difficult for you, they frustrate you, and we've made errors against them. They're physical and they force you into making errors, but we really need to get a good win against London Irish, and then that will kickstart the next month, as you said, for some very important games.
Toby Booth, he took us on the Saxons, he's on the Saxons, and to be honest I was quite impressed with him. He's a good coach, he makes things very plain, he sort of sees opportunities against to use against opposition. and you know, he breaks it down, makes it simple for the players, and he was in charge of the forwards, so I worked closely with him in line-outs, and he's got a lot of good ideas. So I kind of had an inkling that, you know, they'd come good. I didn't quite expect to be quite as good, but they are playing well at the moment.
With the Worcester game in hand, we're just 8 points ahead of Irish, so if we can beat them and beat Worcester, we're going to be either the same level or on top of London Irish, so it's good. We're finding our attack. I think we're scoring a lot of tries in the last games, and our defence is still great, so it's good.
And the latest team news we have from the Sale camp is that Chris Jones replaces the Clermont-Auvergne-bound Jason White, while at scrum half Dwayne Peel is in for Richard Wigglesworth. The three-day National Motorcycle Show is underway at Manchester Central, and on this morning's breakfast show, Mike and Byron were joined by two of the riders involved in the event, Jenny Tinmouth and Mark Samuels, who explained what's just in store.
We're taking the full range of Suzuki motorcycles as well as the latest clothing and accessories for our 11th year at the National Motorcycle Show.
It's been going for 11 years?
Yeah,
wow.
Absolutely. Yeah.
This is footage from last year's event, similar sort of things, what we can see over the weekend?
Yeah, the Extreme Trials guys are there again. Absolutely awesome display.
Is that Dan and Martin? Is
yeah, stunning display. And again, I think for this year, the first time that I've seen it, there's a globe of death, which is just again incredible. You know, 3 people in basically a big football.
So just go through it again. Where and when for the next 3 days?
Next 3 days at Manchester Central, and as I say, it's a great show, great event. There's plenty to see.
A done deal in the transfer market today sees Macclesfield striker Martin Gritton sign for League Two side Chesterfield for an undisclosed fee. Gritton made 56 appearances and scored 16 goals for Macclesfield since signing in 2007. On to matches for the weekend. Stockport County's game against Swindon at the County Ground is subject to a pitch inspection this afternoon, and should the game not go ahead, it's already been rescheduled for Tuesday night. As for Bury's game, they had a pitch inspection this morning, and the match against Barnet is definitely on. Well, that's all from me for now. Join me again later on, where I'll have all the build-up from this weekend's sport.
Thank you very much, Sam. More sport then from 5 o'clock with Andy Crane tonight. Still ahead then, we find out about Chester Zoo's staff counting just how many animals are in the park, and we're visiting the Greater Manchester churches that have been voted some of the most beautiful in the area.
It's always difficult with buildings that are so old and so well respected and loved that you want them to be still useful. But we've tried to do all of those sorts of things whilst also enhancing the beauty, which is important.
Welcome back to Channel M's Lunchtime News. Don't forget you can find all our reports online 24 hours a day. Log on and take a look whenever you want at channelm.co.uk. On there right now, the pictures of Cristiano Ronaldo's dramatic car crash near Manchester Airport that's left his Ferrari a write-off, and pictures as well from the 3-day visit by members of the Cabinet to the North West. We've been with ministers at several locations across Greater Manchester. That's at channelm.co.uk. Next, let's go back to our top story and the investigation that's revealed how easy it is to get thousands of pounds of credit with little or no checks. There's concern some of the biggest high street names are handing out store cards too easily, even though most of us are feeling short of cash right now. Together with the Manchester Evening News, we sent someone with no income to simply ask for a card. She managed to get more than £3,000 worth of credit.
This is Abigail. She's a student and doesn't have a full-time job. So how easy is it for her to get credit at some of the big-name shops on the high street? Well, first was Debenhams. There she was given a card with a credit limit of £1,000. Then House of Fraser. Again, they approved her for £1,000 of credit. Oasis, the fashion chain, issued Abby with a card and up to £300 of credit. At Monsoon, she could have spent another £300 in store. And it was a similar story at Topshop. £350 of credit, while New Look offered her £125. However, at BHS, they carried out a referral but refused to give credit on the spot, and the same at Marks & Spencer. At River Island, they also refused to give Abby a card. Even so, in the space of an hour, she'd managed to get more than £3,000 of credit.
It was all very quick and easy. We walked into the store, went up to the counter, asked for a store card, filled in a form, sales assistant would make a quick phone call, and within 5 minutes we'd have anything from £300 to £1,000 to spend.
The stores that offered credit defended their position. In a statement, Topshop said to us, every applicant is given a full credit check to prevent people receiving credit if they are not in a position which means they can afford it. This would include students. Store cards can be very tempting, usually offering a big percentage discount on any purchases you make the day you sign up. But they often carry a high interest rate. For example, if you used the card from Oasis, you'd pay interest at a rate of 28.9%, plus a £12 charge for any late payments. And of course, with every card, there are the terms and conditions. So for the unaware, it's potentially a minefield. And with more people in financial difficulty at the moment, perhaps the safest option is, if you don't have the money, simply don't spend it. Ben Bland, Channel M News.
Well, joining us now is Neil Cooper from Christian Action on Poverty here in Manchester. Neil, thank you very much for coming in. You campaign on issues such as this. What do you make of how easy it was there for us to get as much credit as we did?
It's pretty shocking that in the middle of the credit crunch, companies are still lending out money to people with no visible means of paying it back. It's immoral, it's irresponsible, and it's really bad business practice, because if the companies don't get the money back, then they're going to make things worse for themselves as well as for the young people involved.
From your experience, how much of a problem does this cause for individuals when they can get so much credit?
It's a huge problem. We see nationally record levels of personal debt, and for many people that ends up in court, it ends up with them unable to pay, and in thousands of pounds of debt. And that can leave them with a bad credit history for years, which really can wreck their lives.
What more would you like to see the stores doing about this?
The stores have got to look at their practice about how they lend. They need to look not just at credit history. If people haven't borrowed in the past, they won't have a credit history. They need to look at people's income. And if they haven't got an income, then they haven't got a means of paying it back and shouldn't get credit. But they also need to look at the costs. Some of these credit cards were up to 30% APR, and that's far too high when people are already maybe struggling on low incomes or no incomes. They shouldn't be paying rates of interest at that level.
OK, Neil Cooper, thank you very much for joining us this lunchtime. Police say it took them several hours to find the body of a missing pensioner inside her Stockport home because it was so full. Joan Canane was a shopaholic. Officers say the 77-year-old's bungalow was packed from floor to ceiling, including thousands of videos. She'd been a compulsive shopper for 15 years and often slept at her friend's house because there was so little room at hers. An American man who's divorcing his wife is demanding she give back the kidney he donated to her. Dr. Richard Batista says if she doesn't, he wants $1.5 million in compensation. She filed for divorce in 2005, but a settlement's not been agreed, and divorce lawyers say the organ isn't a marital asset that can be divided. 6 churches here in Greater Manchester have been named among the North West's most beautiful. They are the Church of the Holy Name of Jesus in Chorlton-on-Medlock, Manchester Cathedral, St Anne's in the city centre, St Leonard's in Middleton, St Wilfrid's in Standish and St Philip's in Salford.
We're a little unusual in Greater Manchester. The sort of Georgian style that we are is not very common. So that makes us a little bit different than most churches. And we are a very beautiful and lovely building that's been, I think over the years, has been reasonably well looked after, and we've been trying to enhance its beauty and usefulness in recent years. It's always difficult with buildings that are so old and so well respected and loved that you want them to be still useful. So, you know, putting in disabled loos and things like that is important to us. But we've tried to do all of those sorts of things whilst also enhancing the beauty, which is important.
All right, being Friday, let's take a look at what entertainment's in store for us over the weekend. Joining me is Neil Sowerby from citylife.co.uk. Good afternoon, Neil. We've got the big movie release tonight, haven't we?
Oh, 5 stars we gave it. Rarely gets citylife.co.uk, rarely gives 5 stars. Slumdog Millionaire. Story about a boy in Mumbai slums who wants to be a millionaire, Indian style. But it's a romance as well, but it captures the dark underbelly of the city. In fact, the Victoria Terminus, where the massacre took place, that's where they filmed one of the great Bollywood-style numbers. So you might get an Oscar on the sympathy vote. I think it'll get it because it's class. And it's by Danny Boyle from Radcliffe.
And also the first big music event of the year at the MEN Arena too.
The luckiest man on earth. This is Chris Brown, 19, 2 million copies of his first R&B album sold, and it's rumoured this week he got engaged to Rihanna. And he's got 18,000 people in the Manchester Evening News Arena, keeping warm and enjoying his smooth sounds.
Oh, well, we'll look forward to that. Lots to look forward to this weekend. More details as well if you are looking for something to do at citylife.co.uk. Neil, thank you very much. Next, if you work somewhere that has to do an annual stock take around this time of year, spare a thought for the staff at Chester Zoo. Chances are your stock perhaps stays largely in one place. Not so with their animals, which have all had to be counted, and there are plenty of them. 4,732 to be precise.
Once a year, our records officer will print off sheets of every single animal we have in the collection, and literally our keepers go around with a pen and a paper and we'll write down exactly how many animals we have here. We have 4,732, which is the count we did 1st of January this year. Of course, that number changes all the time. I've no doubt that we've now got more snails than we had at the beginning of the year. But basically, it's a snapshot of a point in time that enables the government basically to see that we know exactly what we're doing here and how many animals we have at any one time. Every zoo in the UK is governed by the Zoo Licensing Act, and the Zoo Licensing Act requires that once a year you count all the animals in the zoo. So every zoo across the country, or every aquarium across the country, will be doing this at the beginning of every year. The one species that I'll linger over the count because I like them so much are the Komodo dragons. We've got 2 adults here, Norman and Flora. And they're my particular favourites. And it doesn't take long to count to 2, but I will linger around that enclosure.
Well, after a cold and grey week, let's see how the weekend weather's shaping up. Polly Winder has the forecast.
Okay.
Well, I'm very sorry we can't bring you the weather forecast, but I can tell you that it will be rather cold and chilly over the weekend with some rain showers around in places. You are watching Channel M's Lunchtime News. Let's recap the main headlines for you this afternoon. There's criticism of some of the High Street's biggest names for making it too easy to get store cards. We sent an unemployed student to ask for credit, and in one afternoon she was given enough to borrow more than £3,000. Critics say that the stores need to do more to make it harder for people to get into debt that they can't repay. Oldham-based JD Sports has reported better than expected Christmas sales. They're up 2.8%. The chain was one of the few not to cut prices before the holidays, meaning that those sales figures are all the more impressive. A police officer who performed a sex act in front of a teenager in his patrol car is waiting to be sentenced. PC Christian Abbott was found guilty last month and is appearing at Minsell Street Crown Court. We'll have more on those stories in our early evening news this evening from 5 o'clock, and we'll also have pictures from the motorbike show happening here in Manchester. We'd also like your comments on any of the stories that we've been mentioning this lunchtime. If you'd like to send us them, drop us an email, newsdesk@channelm.co.uk. You can also text us to 88821. That's all from me for this lunchtime. Have a very good afternoon. Join Andy Crane here from 5. Bye-bye for now.